Can you test out the sound real quick? Can you tap the...
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I invoke peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family, his companions and their followers, and the men and women that walk in their footsteps, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among them. Ameen. Brothers and sisters, those who are here with us in person and those who are watching the live stream, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is the Tafseerah program. I appreciate you joining us tonight. This is, I think, part 26 of Surat Al-Baqarah. I actually started Surat Al-Baqarah in January of 2023. So it's been a long time. I hope, inshallah, that we'll be able to finish by the end of May. So maybe 3, possibly 4 more sessions, inshallah, and we will be finished with this incredible surah. Surah Al-Baqarah, as I said before, really is the anchor of the Quran. Surah Al-Baqarah is the constitution of the Ummah. It's essentially the first surah revealed in the Madani period. after the introductory surah that was revealed while the Prophet ﷺ was migrating, and that is Surah Al-Mutaffifin. So it's chapter 1 after the prelude, if you will. And also in the Quran itself, Surah Al-Baqarah is chapter 1 after the intro, which is Surah Al-Fatiha, setting the tone, setting the stage for pretty much everything that comes after, telling us, giving us our marching orders, as members of this ummah and as members of the human community. This surah is about the concept of imaratul ard, the concept of causing the earth to thrive and cultivating it for the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as I said before repeatedly in every session, that this responsibility is shared between us, between man and God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives us the marching orders. He gives us the directives. He tells us, go here, do that. And the execution of those orders, that is our responsibility. How to do it, that is our responsibility. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us these rules and He gave us these directives. And depending on the times that we live in and depending on the technology and the resources that we have, we use what we've got in order to implement Allah's orders in the best way possible, in the most effective way possible. And so when the Quran teaches us that we need to convey its message to the world, right? It so happened that microphones and speaker systems and electricity were invented or discovered. So we use that, and here I am, I'm using microphone and everything in order, it's a completely new method, and that did not exist 1400 years ago, yet we're using it because the execution of the plan is our responsibility, depending on these times. And when social media, came to existence, now there is live streaming and things like that. Let's post it on YouTube, let's put it on Facebook, and all this good stuff, and so here we are, right? And so it is so fitting and it's so suitable and it is so perfect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it Surah Al-Baqarah, the cow. Why? I answered that question so many times. Because the story itself is basically about a conflict that erupted whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave orders, and instead of just following those orders, the community, started making things difficult and asking more questions and, demanding more. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, slaughter a cow, and then use a piece of that cow and strike the dead person with it, and the dead person will come back to life and testify as to who murdered him. It should have ended right then and there, but that community started asking more questions. What does it look like? How big is it? What is the color of the cow, right? So this is precisely why the theme of the surah is that causing the earth to thrive, making this earth a better place, is shared between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives the commands and we execute those commands, and that should be it. The reason they were asking more questions is that because they basically wanted to wiggle out of that responsibility. And so fittingly, the surah was named Surah Al-Baqarah. This is the longest surah of the Quran. It's the most diverse surah of the Quran, the most disparate surah of the Quran in terms of its themes and stories and the prophets that were mentioned and all the angles and the facets and so forth. Surah Al-Baqarah continues to be the constitution of this ummah, to this day, and will continue to be, until the day of judgment. I said before that Surah Al-Baqarah is divided into 4 major sections. The last section, literally, section number 4, is the last 2 ayat, right? So I will talk about this, inshallah, maybe the last session. But we started section number 3, which is the 3rd major section of the surah. And section number 3 basically focuses on the foundations of imaratul ard, the foundations of cultivating this earth, for the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We talked before about the prerequisites of imaratul ard, but inshallah in the next couple of sessions we talk about the foundations, and I said the foundations are 2 things: al-fikr wal-mal, thought and wealth, right? Thought and wealth. You have to have the right set of ideas, and you have to have the right amount of resources in order to support those ideas. All right. Last time, I think it was late February, if I remember correctly, before the month of Ramadan, when we stopped, I covered the first ayah in that section, and that was Ayatul Kursi. This particular segment of Surat Al-Baqarah is very intellectual and is extremely philosophical. And again, that lends itself to the notion that the foundation of every civilization is a set of really good ideas. All right? And I made commentary last time about the ideas that constitute Western civilization. And I said that at some point, during the Renaissance, in the 1600s, right after the Enlightenment, it appeared that those ideas were really good ideas, so they were adopted by the world. At face value, they looked good, right? The ideas of liberty, the ideas of materialism, the ideas, of the pursuit of happiness, the ideas of the protection of property, the ideas of intellectual freedom, individual freedom, the pursuit of pleasures, right? It's the idea of not allowing the church to control the human thought process. It's about not allowing the church to control science, and it's the idea about unfettered wealth. It's the idea about innovation and production. It's the idea about building high-rises and wider highways and faster cars and more beautiful homes and landscapes and so forth. All the imagery that comes to mind when we think of Western civilization, right? In fact, it's that imagery, I think, that inspires the Bedouins of the desert in Saudi Arabia or Dubai, right, to try to emulate Western civilization, because again, in their simplistic minds, they too brought into the notion that those ideas are the end of all good things, and therefore we have to subscribe to those ideas. How can we be civilized? By doing the same exact thing. Wider highways, high-rises, big fancy malls, the most incredible shopping experience, Chanel and Louis Vuitton, because, that is what civilization is about, right? Wealth and private jets and big pools and resorts and all of it, right? And I think humanity went on for a while and ultimately realized that there are good ideas in Western civilization, but there are also horrific ideas, right? I think all of these good notions kind of devolved into, communism and racism and colonialism and the transatlantic, slave trade and the complete annihilation of Aboriginal and native, populations around the world. The Inquisition and the oppression of Muslims and Jews in Europe, in Spain and in other places. The Western civilization devolved into, this uncontrollable lust for wealth, and profit became the objective of every human endeavor, and making more money, even when I have more than enough, became an end in and of itself. I don't need to justify why I want to make more money, or why not, right? Liberty that has absolutely no boundary, in which we basically start attacking the very core of human existence and question the very primary fundamental ideas upon which our very existence hinges, right? And then it became uncontrollable lusts, and then it became uncontrollable individualism, and forget about the values, forget about morality, forget about ethics, forget only laws. We are only bound by laws, and laws are basically determined by the consensus of power in a given society. It's not right or wrong, it's who pushed harder and who bribed more and who spent more money and who used more power circles and so forth. It came to a point where even euthanasia, like suicide or assisted suicide, is now legal in most European countries. It's legal in some American states as well. Absolutely insane. The notion that the human being is free to self-destruct. You are free to commit suicide. You are free to consume drugs that will eventually destroy you, right? You are free to do pretty much whatever you want. But I think the last few months we've also seen a reversal of that. We realize that freedom still has limits, okay? And when religious thought says that freedom has limits, liberals feel like offended. What do you mean limits? There's no limit. There should be no limit, right? Unless of course you start criticizing the LGBTQ community, or you start criticizing Israel, or you start you're getting into the wasp's nest. That is when your freedom ends, and that is when suddenly democratic systems are reduced into, fascist tactics. And we've seen scenes, on university campuses in Europe and in the United States that are reminiscent of the 1960s. And things that you would think that this is happening in a third world country, right? Where students are being attacked because of what they say. Like, it's just, crazy. But then it's a good wake-up call because, we've believed the lie for so long. And so it's about time to realize that what Western civilization has achieved still has massive limitations because it was man-made ideas in the first place, all right? And so these are the ideas that were adopted by the entire world. And that's why we say in this era, there is a triumph of Western civilization. That triumph started with military colonialism, but then after one point or the other, when local populations adopted your very ideas and your very way of life, there was no point in leaving boots on the ground. Take the soldiers out. They're already ours. We already control them, right? One of the things that I've been reading recently in Africa, in some of the West African countries, the Niger or Ghana or, Sierra Leone or whatever, there's this sort of like local revolt against, mostly France, right? But also, the presence of, the UK and so forth. Why? I mean, wait a second. I thought that, the Niger got their independence in the 1960s. But they didn't, did they? Right? France continues to occupy those countries to this day. When Lebanon, when the Lebanese economy collapsed, you remember after that massive explosion by the port, a couple of years ago, and the Lebanese, economy collapsed, Macron, the leader of France, right? He was walking the streets of Beirut like he's the president of Beirut, right? Pointing at this and fix that and what is going on here. And you don't even see Lebanese politicians over there. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that the set of ideas that constituted Western civilization were tested over time, okay? Some of them were valuable. We have to be reasonable, right? We are sitting right now in a setting that is accommodated by Western civilization. We're able to build a mosque because this is the Western civilization. We're able to have, some degree of free exchange in our mosque. We're able to post some of this information on social media, although now social media is being censored and what is posted on Instagram. Someone sent me like a video of a child in Gaza that is reciting a surah in the Quran. That's it. So when I access the video, I access this through the tablet, and the tablet, I was not logged in. So I realized that it says you cannot access this video unless you're logged in because this video, this account was tagged or something like that. So I have to go to my phone because I'm logged in, and then I was able to access the video, and then I was like, okay, this is going to be like a video of a massacre in Gaza or something. It's a child that is reciting the Quran, right? But that now, in this day and age, is enough to get an account tagged, right? And so there are still some valuable ideas in Western civilization, the idea of free exchange, the idea of individual freedom, the idea of, supporting, innovation, inventions, trying to, take advantage of the natural desire of every human being to be wealthy and to feel financially comfortable, and all of that to drive innovation. All of that is not entirely sinister as long as it is somehow tempered by moral boundaries that are not set by man. That is the only criterion, okay? And so, if these are the set of ideas that have made Western civilization what it is, they are contrasted by another set of ideas that made the Islamic civilization what it is. And those set of ideas, that set of ideas is so important because it is through that set of ideas that we envision a world that is built by the process of imaratul ard, right? If we say that the world needs to be cultivated for the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what are the ideas that constitute that potential civilization? What does it look like? And so you contract that civilization, let's say with Western ideals, and then you realize that the ideas of the Muslim civilization are about family, right? They're about God. They're about meaning. They're about purpose. They are about hope. They are about not engaging in excess. They're about being content with what you have. They are about protecting your values. They are about investing in the hereafter. They are about universal brotherhood. They are about love and respect. Also tolerance of other religions and other faiths and other ways of life, of course, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us very different from each other. But it's also about investing in the hereafter. It's also about understanding who God is and what God wants from us, right? These are our values. And so a beautiful civilization that is inspired by Islam, I'll give you a really good example, by the way. If you're into the superhero culture and the superhero movies and Marvel and all that, if you remember the first movie, Black Panther, right? The Black Panther envisions a civilization that is built in secret by Africans hidden from the world, right? And that civilization produced, this great superhero, Black Panther, right? Who was the king of that particular kingdom. But the thing is, when you actually see what they produced, what did they produce? It is sort of a mutilated version of Western civilization. It still revolves around the same concept. Big buildings and big high-rises, massive highways, massive cars, massive jets, fancy technology, as if that is the only manifestation of what is civilized. And that is not particularly true, right? What if a beautiful civilization is about people living a simple life in the desert? What if a beautiful civilization is about people who farm their land and raise their animals and connect with nature and feel happy and fulfilled and they are content with their 950 square foot home as opposed to 17,000 square feet, where the husband needs to call his wife because he doesn't know where they actually is. He needs to monitor her on the screen like, little flashing black, red dot moving around the house. I'm not joking. There's a brother, he's married and he has 4 kids. He's putting a chip on his kids in order to know where they are in the house. Right? And this is like about 15 minutes from here. Right? I'm not even joking. This is true, right? And so what if a beautiful civilization is one where neighbors eat together every single evening? There's like 50 families that come together and have dinner. What if a beautiful civilization is people between Maghrib and Isha, they are together, the togetherness of that universal brotherhood. If you remember, I keep making movie references here, I hope you're still following me. If you remember, from the Lord of the Rings, you remember in Hobbytown, how the hobbits, all of them, they would come together and have dinner together, right? It's not big buildings, it's not, massive skyscrapers or high-rises. We need, as Muslims, to envision an alternative reality. One that does not borrow and mimic and simulate the components of Western civilization, but rather something else. We need to be at least open to the possibility of something else. And you might say, like, what is the place of technology? I would say the place of technology primarily is defense. Because that's the one thing you cannot compromise. The enemy is going to come annihilate everything you have. He's going to blow your beautiful lifestyle into smithereens. Okay? So if you want to build a beautiful lifestyle, you have to protect that lifestyle with proper defense, right? So, but again, the point here, so you cannot compromise technology completely. Technology still needs to be brought into the mix, but, not corrupt the mix. I think that this is what technology has done to us. Like, how many devices here? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm using them right now in a useful fashion. 90% of the time we use them in a harmful fashion. Isn't that true? Right? And so the world that the Islamic thought envisions does not necessarily try to compete toe-to-toe with Western civilization. Okay? Rather, it wants to take a completely different trajectory. We don't know exactly. Every community, every society is free to envision what that trajectory is going to look like, as long as it is aided and supported by the right set of ideas, much like I shared with you earlier. So it is very important for us to examine the type of thought that provides the intellectual backing to any civilizational undertaking. Because otherwise, it is something that is bound to disappear, that is bound to wither, sooner or later. Western civilization is on its way to the ultimate destruction. We already know that, right? It's just a matter of time. And so, in order to avoid, a similar fate, we cannot, just like the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith says, that you will follow them even if they go burrow into the holes. You're going to go follow them into the holes as well, right? في جحر ضب خرب, right? The dubb is some type of a reptile that used to, maybe not a reptile. It's either a reptile or some kind of a rodent, right? That the Prophet ﷺ, refused to eat. It's halal to eat, and they burrow their holes, and so the Jews and Christians, you're going to follow their footsteps until they start burrowing in the holes like this, the rodent, and you're going to burrow the holes, after them, which is exactly what we're doing right now. All right, and so the third section of Surat Al-Baqarah is trying to teach us about those two things: the foundations of a strong civilization, right? Number one, the right type of thought, the right type of intellect, the right set of ideas, and the other one is wealth, okay? And we're going to talk about both, inshallah, but tonight I am focused on Ayatul Kursi, which basically starts us off on this discussion. And last time, we talked about Ayatul Kursi in the sense, from the perspective of the scholars, the scholars of Tafseerah, the virtues of Ayatul Kursi, the ajr, the reward of saying it, and how it impacts your life spiritually, and so on and so forth. We've covered all that last time. Tonight, I want to focus on the secrets, the intellectual secrets of Ayatul Kursi. All right? Ayatul Kursi is this incredible, ayah, 256 in Surat Al-Baqarah, the verse of Al-Kursi, right? All right, so what is the kursi, by the way? No.
The step stool.
The stool, right? This is the leg rest. That's like the Ottoman. Right? I don't like to use that word, but that's a derogatory word that the Europeans used, in order to insult the Turks, right? Just like croissants. if you know the history, right? The Ottomans are, on the outskirts of Vienna, about to take the city. And because of internal disputes, they get defeated, and so the Austrians they bake this beautiful sort of pastry that looks like a crescent, which is the emblem of the Ottomans, and they eat it, right? And here we are, Muslims. Here we love croissant so much. I know I do, right? It's delicious, right? But you have to understand the history. Be that as it may, the kursi is the footrest. This is basically the little ottoman, that you have in your living room or whatever. So Ayatul Kursi, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, tells us so many incredible things about Him, and clarity about God, clarity about the nature of God, clarity about the attributes and the qualities of God is a very important first step towards the development of the right intellectual process. Okay? Right? Because it is precisely the lack of that clarity that has caused massive problems and wreaked havoc across generations. All right? And I'm going to give you a few examples. Okay? Why the lack of clarity of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is caused so many problems. So, a God that favors a particular ethnic group and elevates them above everyone else and calls them His own chosen people. Why? Why wasn't I chosen? Why weren't you chosen? Why did you choose another human being that looks exactly like me, eyes, ears, nose, arms? Why him and her and not me and her? Right? That doesn't make sense. Sooner or later, this idea is going to get exposed. And it's going to get exposed because it leads to very harmful things. If you are God's chosen people, you get away with anything, right? If you're God's chosen people, you can come back 3,000 years later and steal land that presumably belonged to your ancestors. And you didn't really say anything because, hey, I'm I belong to God's chosen people. That's a very dangerous idea, and sooner or later it shows that it's extremely harmful, right? So that is a misunderstanding of what God would ever say. That there's no just, fair God that would give some unjustifiable privilege to a group of His creation at the expense of everyone else. That doesn't make sense, right? A God that wrestles with man and loses. What is the meaning of the word Israel? Wrestling with God. It was one of the names of Yaqub alayhi salam. Okay? Because in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Old Testament, it suggests that God wrestled with Yaqub. Like they had a wrestling match. And then Yaqub beat him. Like I said, it's mind-boggling. I know that you're all raising your eyebrows in shock, but this is actually foundational to Jewish thought. All right? I know there's a lot of people in the Jewish community that obviously have readdressed all of these notions, and there's a lot of reform and there's a lot of sort of review of these types of claims, right? But if you are an Orthodox Jewish person that is absolutely committed to the letter of the Scriptures, you have to accept that at some point or the other, God was defeated in a wrestling match by a human being. Okay? These are very harmful ideas. Not harmful just because they are disrespectful of God. They're harmful because they reduce God into something that I can, not only just reason with, it's something that I can be angry with and yell at and complain. And right? This is not the right spirit when it comes to God. A God that sends His own Son, made of flesh and blood, to die on the cross for questionable reasons. I'm not going to say for bad reasons. At least they're questionable reasons. Like you question the validity of the plan. Because if the plan was for Jesus to die on the cross in order for everyone to be impressed, and that's that great miracle, then all of them would have accepted Christianity at that point, but most of them didn't. Okay, and so if there was any goal behind this, that goal certainly was not achieved, right? It is a God that created man in His own image. In other words, God has hair, He has ears, He has a nose, He has hair in His nose, He has lips, He has teeth, He has a tongue, right? He has a pharynx, He has a larynx, He has an esophagus, He has a liver, He has a digestive system, He has legs. What else does He have? I can keep going, right? And why? Okay? We have lungs and we have noses because I need to smell things, because otherwise, life would be so dull. I need skin so I can touch things and feel, right? I need a liver so that I can do, digestion. Why does God need any of those things, right? Allah created man in His own image. What does that even mean, and why? Okay, these are not only wrong ideas, they're harmful ideas, because, again, as we've seen over time, the Western world moved away from this. The Western world became godless, because this eventually will get exposed. It's ideas that just don't make sense. They were accepted on faith for a while. A couple hundred years later, they just became completely invalid, right? This is a God that gets blindsided. It's a God that gets surprised. It's a God that created Adam and Eve for a reason, and then He discovers later that they did something behind His back, and He gets so angry, and He kicks them out of paradise. What kind of God is that? God I can lie to? A God I can deceive? A God I can do stuff behind His back? What kind of God is that? Sooner or later I'm going to lose trust in this God, and then I say to myself, what kind? There's no such thing, right? This is a God that is opposed to science, a God that hates scientists, a God that doesn't like the truth, right? Doesn't like scientific discovery, a God that gave justification to colonialism, to racism, to the exploitation of Aboriginal and Native peoples, right? A God that gave credence to the slave trade, a God that gave credence to oppression and the Inquisition and all the crimes that were committed one after the other in the name of that God, right? These are very harmful ideas. And so understanding with absolute clarity who God is in terms of his nature, okay? Or perhaps don't ask about his nature in the first place, right? I just need some guidance. What his qualities are, what his attributes are, is absolutely essential for me to develop the foundational set of ideas that I'll be able to use as a springboard to build a civilization that is God conscious, to build a civilization that will actually cause the earth to thrive. And it was those harmful ideas about God, or that lack of clarity about God, that shaped the current intellectual patterns and the current intellectual dilemmas of the Western world, right? They are trying to reconcile between impossible things, right? And so it is imperative for the Quranic narrative to set the record straight about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that would lead me into Ayatul Kursi. This is. I know that we recite this ayah all the time, and that we recite this verse after we finish our prayers. And it is perhaps everyone, people may not memorize any of the ayat of Surat Al-Baqarah, but everyone knows Ayatul Kursi, 256. And how does it start? Allahu la ilaha illa huwa Al-Hayyul Qayyum. There are three concepts in this ayah. So what does it say in the translation? God, there is no deity except him, the ever-living, the self-subsistent. There are three things involved here. La ilaha illahu talks about what? Oneness, and oneness is what the other word is? Tawheed, right? The oneness of God, the absolute oneness of God, right? La ilaha illahu. Okay, that's one notion that we need to talk about. Number two, it says Al-Hayy. What is Al-Hayy? The ever-living, all right? The third one is Al-Qayyum. Self-sustaining, self-subsistent, right? He is the one that causes everything else to stand because he stands on his own. All right? These are three very different concepts, and the three need attention from us, right? La ilaha illahu. Tawheed leads to what? Tawheed is a very simple and basic philosophical notion about God that says the existence of more than one God is impossible, is intellectually impossible. Okay? Idol worshipping is not just God. It's not just wrong. It's not just an insult to God. It is again something that makes zero sense if thought through. Why? Because if there is a God, then that God has to be all-powerful. It is unimaginable for God to exist and then there is someone else that has better qualities or has more power. That would not make any sense. And so God has to be the ultimate in his power, the ultimate in his reach, the ultimate in his grace. He reaches the absolute height of every quality. Wouldn't that be true? Otherwise, intellectually, I'm not even talking about the Quran, like Christian theologians would agree with this notion, okay? That intellectually, if there is a creator, then that creator has to be maximal in his greatness, regardless of which aspect we're discussing, right? So if I said that this table is maximal in its greatness, what does that mean?
There's no other table like that.
That there's no other table. Because if this table is maximal, then it leaves no room for any other table. Because if there's another table that somebody else can use, to put a pen on, then that purpose was not achieved by this table, right? If I said that the table is maximally great, then I have to concede to the fact that there's only one table. Otherwise, it's okay to say that the table doesn't exist. That's your intellectual progress. We can talk about that. But if you say that the table exists and you say that the table is maximally great, then you have to concede to the fact that the table is only one of a kind. There is no other table. Because the mere existence of another table would create a deficiency in this table. Does that make sense? And so Tawheed is not just a matter of faith. Tawheed is not just a theological, Muslims believe that there is one God and Hindus believe that there's, 749 gods, right? This is not it. Tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a logical necessity by intellect. This is something that we can reach on our own without the scriptures. All right? And so La ilaha illallah, the most essential statement of Tawheed, is 100% true. And establishing this is so important before we talk about anything else. It is lack of confusion. No. the lack of clarity about this matter, confusion about this matter, that enabled Christians to get away with this for 2,000 years. Like, you read the Bible, and I say this with all due respect. You read the Bible, and then the verse in the New Testament, basically, Jesus is suffering on the cross. He's in so much pain. He's crying, and he's so angry. And he speaks to God, and he says, Father, have you abandoned me? Dude, wasn't that your plan from the very beginning? Wasn't the plan for you to come and be on the cross and suffer and die on the cross? If that was your plan, why are you upset? You could smile and say, kill me, destroy me, tear me to pieces. That is my plan. That's what I've always wanted. Go ahead. That's what I want. You're just fulfilling my prophecy. Okay? He's angry like a human being would be. Of course, we Muslims, we believe that, Jesus did not die on a cross. That's beside the point. But I'm just saying, even if we accept that narrative and we analyze it intellectually, you realize that it would not make any possible sense. So he speaks to God with great anger and great consternation and great disappointment, feeling that he was abandoned. He says, God, why have you abandoned me? I'm doing your work right here on earth, and you're letting me suffer. So God does what? He sends the archangel Gabriel to comfort and bring solace to the heart of Jesus. And that's when Jesus, finally calms down and he accepts his fate. If you ask a child, are we talking about one person or three people? What are they going to say? There's no way that we're talking about one person here. These are three people with three different agendas, with three different intents, with three different consciousness. They're not the same, right? They can't be possibly the same. So Christianity needs to make up its mind. Is that a polytheistic, faith or religious tradition or whatever, or is it monotheistic? If you uphold the Trinity, then it has to be polytheistic. If you say, no, we are monotheists, then you need to really just forego this whole thing, and let's accept it that the Islamic perspective says Isa alayhi salam is a human being, flesh and blood. The Archangel Gabriel, Ar-Ruh al-Qudus, right? The Holy Spirit, that's a third entity, that's just an angel, it's a creation of God, and then there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one. So see, Tawheed leads to certain results, and lack of clarity about Tawheed leads to very, very different results. And then later on, you see people abandoning the church en masse. Because again, the idea is not working out. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, the one thing, repeatedly, every time someone from Christianity converts to Islam, the one thing that they keep telling me is just the Trinity made no sense to me. Why would God make the most central doctrine of Christianity so confusing that it turns people away from Christianity? Right? So the first notion is Allah la ilaha illahu, right? Number two, al-hayy. The ever-living, okay? When I say something is ever-living, what are some of the things that come to mind?
He's irrespective of the time and space.
Okay, very good. So he has always been around. So he is, I guess the other word that you probably meant to say, if someone has been around, eternally in the past, what is the word for this? Beginningless. Yeah. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beginningless. He is eternal into the past. But he's endless. He is eternal into the future as well, because he is Hayy. I mean, okay, I can call myself Hayy as well. I am alive, right? But I know that my life depends on something else. My life depends on God, okay? I am not ever living. I am just alive, and I'm alive temporarily. Sooner or later, I will leave this world. A while ago, I wasn't here, and a while later, I won't be here, okay? That's a different kind of life. That's a temporary life. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-hayy in the present tense, right? He is beginninglessly alive and he is eternally alive. That's the first meaning here. But the second meaning is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also the source of life for everything, right? If he is the one that is beginninglessly and eternally alive, then every life is also derived from him. Every life on earth. And if every life is derived from an essential quality of God, then life itself would remain a secret. Wouldn't you agree? because we are not supposed to fathom the very essential qualities of God's nature. And life is one of the essential qualities of God's nature. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. They ask you about the secret of the Spirit. Tell them that is of the affairs of my Lord. Meaning, it is from ilm al-ghayb. This is intellectually consistent. Because God taught us that you will know my qualities, you will know my attributes, but you will not be able to fathom my
Spirit,
my nature, my essence, who I really am. Okay? Because your minds cannot encapsulate who I am. I am okay with this. I am perfectly fine, intellectually fine with this. Because I understand the physical limitations of the human brain. The human brain, no matter what, is finite. How can you help the finite understand and comprehend the infinite? That is physically, that is intellectually impossible. So as human beings with humility, we accept the limitation. That's fine. That is still intellectually consistent, right? But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alive, and He is eternally and beginninglessly and alive, then He is the one that imparts life on everything else. And if that life, the ruh, the spirit, is essentially derived from His essence, then it will remain a secret. And to this day, we don't know the secret of life. If you take a histological slide or picture of a cell before and after death, you will see no difference. There will be like 1 second before, 1 second after, you will see no difference. All right? And so life continues to be a secret because it's derived from the very secret of Allah's Ruh Himself. Number 3, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alive, then your creator is not some mechanical process. He's a personal God with consciousness, with volition, a personal God who has a plan, who makes decisions, right? This is not some kind of a determined mechanical process, because I've heard some atheists say that. The universe was created by an impersonal mechanical process. But that still begs the question, who created the mechanical process? Where did the mechanical process come from? So the mechanical process has to come from a process that is not mechanical. Otherwise, we can regress infinitely into those questions, right? So, Tawheed and life, Al-Hayy. Number 3, Al-Qayyum. What is Al-Qayyum? That is the self-subsistent. And if someone is self-subsistent, then by definition, he is also responsible for the sustaining of everything else. Because, the glasses are not self-subsistent. The cell phone is not self-subsistent. I am not self-subsistent. Everything depends on something else for its subsistence. All right? And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that is self-subsistence, then everything else derives their subsistence from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately. Okay? So He is the power that causes everything to exist. If we're all contingent things, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only incontingent thing. If we're all dependent things, depend on someone in our existence, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only independent thing, right? And if Allah is incontingent, then He is able to create and manage the contingent while staying out of it. Does that make sense? In other words, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Qayyum, the self-subsistent, and He is able to create the contingent world, because He is Himself incontingent, right? Then He does not exist within the limitations of the very thing that He created. Like I create the cell phone, I don't live inside the cell phone. The cell phone is an independent product of me. I use it, I put it here, I open it up, I talk to people through it, right? But this cell phone is not me and I am not it. I am not in it and it is not in me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the universe, which means that He is independent of that universe. And if He is independent of that universe, then He is not bound by its physical laws. He is not bound by its physical limitations. He does not occupy space. He does not move in time. You see how many consequences of this understanding will come to the fore? It's absolutely insane, the amount of philosophy that is in Surah, in Ayatul Kursi, and I'm still on the first piece of this ayah. Number 2, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. He neither slumbers and nor overtakes, and he neither slumbers nor sleeps. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not take a nap. He does not lose consciousness. He does not lose focus. He does not lose attention. He does not get distracted. He does not give more attention to this matter more than that matter. You know, when we, in our human world, and that's why it's so essential to disentangle us from God and to dissociate ourselves intellectually from in terms of our own qualities, from the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We get distracted all the time, right? If you're watching TV, you're distracted from, prayer. If you're praying, you're distracted from food. If you're eating, you're distracted from work. We're always distracted by something. We cannot possibly give an equal amount of attention to everything. Even people that say, they're multitasking, okay, they're still giving some more attention to one thing at the expense of another. There's no way, all right? And even if they're multitasking, they're maybe handling 3 or 4 tasks at a time, max. Like you're driving, you're on the phone, you're eating a sandwich, you're driving, manual transmission. Like, these are just like 4 things at a time, max. Okay, like, what is it really that you can do in one given second? Right? So sometimes this is just a made-up word that we use in order to enhance ourselves. Oh, I'm a multitasker, right? There's no such thing. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pays, if you will, 24/7 attention to everything in the universe. He created the universe. And that's important for me to know, that God didn't just create the universe and kind of let it operate, like Aristotle said, or like many agnostics of this age say, all right? There are these people, they don't want to commit to anything. Well, God created a perfect universe, endowed it with the proper physical laws, and he just kind of let it be. He's not there. Or Aristotle that says, God doesn't know the particulars, he only knows the generals. Seriously? Contrast that with our notion, right? There isn't a single tiny little mustard seed, under a rock in the bottom of the ocean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not know of. See the 2 different worldviews that will come out of this. The Muslim operates knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala monitors every single breath, every single thought, every single word, every single action, everything I do, even the things that I don't do. The things that I say and the things that I don't say. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has full account of all of those things. That generates a completely different human being than the other God that kind of creates and lets be, and then he goes and he does something else, right? So لَا تَأْخُذْهُ سِنَةٌ وَلَا نَوْمٌ. He's not overtaken by slumber and he does not sleep, subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know that I'm accountable before God every minute of every day. Number 3, لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To him belongs everything that is in heavens and all that is on earth. Everything. And everything is a really powerful word, because we're saying that everything in the universe belongs to God. What's in the universe? The galaxies and the stars and the planets and the meteors, but also Earth. And what's on Earth? Everything. I mean, you talk from the inanimate objects, the trees and the oceans and the water and the minerals and oxygen and nitrogen and everything, but also, the crustaceans and the rodents and the reptiles and the birds and the mammals and everything in between, right? But also those that existed before and those that will exist, after, and those that exist in the present, including human beings. And what is a human being made of? Everything that you have, your car, your house, your eyeglasses, your shades, your hijab, your shoes, everything that belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not yours. He's just letting you use it. You're the tenant, all right? That's a very different notion if you understood that about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here, not just even human choice belongs to God. Even the things that we do, that still belongs to God. Because we said everything, right? We said لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Everything that is in heavens and earth, that is in the universe, belongs to God. So you cannot even take claim of your own ideas and your own thoughts and your own actions. And that created, a dilemma about free will for the scholars. If God is the owner of human action, then can we be accountable for those actions? Right? And that is what created the different groups, Al-Qadariyya, Al-Jabriyya, Al-Mu'tazila, and all of that. And there is a very helpful notion that the Ash'aris produced, and we've talked about it I think in other platforms, that while all the actions are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the human being selects one action at a time from a finite set. So if I said, I will stand up, I will sit, I will yell, I will scream, I will deliver the lecture, I will eat a sandwich, I will go home. There's a finite number of choices, all generated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then, for the purposes of accountability, He gives you the right to select which one you will use at any given moment. Right? So even the very choices that we select from is a finite set of choices and all generated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? But ultimately, this also means if Allah is the true owner of all things, He's also the true owner of destinies. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about next year. Don't worry about your sustenance and your rizq and your provision. Don't worry about the people of Gaza. Those who survive will be heroes, and those who die will be martyrs, and they'll be with God in heaven. Either way. We're going to feel sad for the loss of life, obviously, right? But ultimately, in our hearts, we know that casting emotions aside, it is all part of the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are okay with it, and we accept it, right? He's the true owner of destinies. He's also the true owner of all the material things. Why are you fighting over stuff? Why do we see brothers and sisters fight over inheritance? If you don't derive lessons from the deceased that just died and left everything, and you're fighting over that, and in a couple of years, or maybe a couple of seconds, you die yourself and you leave it for somebody else, what is it really worth to you that you fight over it, right? So then this is a very different perspective. It's a completely different perspective on the world when we realize these things. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. Right? He says, who is there that could intercede with Him unless it be with His permission? You can't just go intercede on behalf of God, right? Lord, please, for my sake, that person, no punishment, okay? All right? Please, between us. You can't talk to God like this, right? Even the notion, when the Prophet ﷺ interceded on behalf of some of the munafiqeen in Medina, Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ أَبَدًا. Do not stand by their graves and do not pray janazah over them, right? Do not ask me to forgive, those people that died in full sin, that died fighting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that died fighting the faith. Don't ask me, right? And so when Allah says, you can't just go and intercede on behalf, I will let you talk if I wanted to, right? On the Day of Judgment, Allah teaches us in the Quran, وَخَشَعَتِ الْأَصْوَاتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ فَلَا تَسْمَعُ إِلَّا هَمْسًا. People on the Day of Judgment can't even talk. They whisper to each other because they are in so much awe of the moment that they can't talk. You can't just talk, okay? What does that generate in the mind? It generates in the mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just your Lord that loves you and provides for you and takes care of you and so forth and forgives you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also your ilah. Who is the ilah? He is the God enthroned. He is the king. He is the ruler. You are His subject. He is the master. You are His slave. He has authority over you. He has dominion over you. He has power over you. Allah instructs and you follow. Allah commands and you obey. That is how you treat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is essentially the meaning of ubudiyyah, right? And so there are limits and boundaries and lines that cannot be crossed with God. I cannot yell and scream because I didn't like the decree of God. This has become so common today. People get angry at God. In a Muslim ethos, you don't get angry at God because you understand this notion. But when there is lack of clarity about the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's very easy to get angry and start yelling and screaming, at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then ultimately lose your faith. We obey, we surrender, and we revere. يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُم. He knows what's behind them and what's before them. What is behind them and what's in front of them. Okay? In a temporal sense, what has passed, the events of the past, and what still remains in the events of the future. Past, present, and future is within the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which again fits perfectly with the intellectual necessities that we've talked about earlier. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not belong to the universe, well, guess what? Time is a creation of the universe. Time only passes in the universe. So if you're somehow outside the universe, and you cannot be physically outside the universe, but you can be metaphysically outside the universe, because physicality is also, the occupation of actual space is also a quality of the universe, right? And I know this is very difficult for us to process, okay, but we take it as is, all right? All these notions about matter and physical space and time and so forth, and even vacuum, all of that, these are qualities of the created universe. If you're outside of that universe, none of these qualities apply anymore. You exist, but you exist in a different sense. Not in the sense that you and I exist here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Jannah, hellfire, all of that, angels, all of these things, ilm al-ghayb, all of this stuff is outside this universe. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is outside the universe, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not within the timeline. So you can't say, God knows my future choices. Oh, there are your future choices, but for Him, it's the same. Right? It's present, past, present, and future, all the same to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Because He's not with you in the timeline. So that would be another dimension of attributing, that clarity to our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is timeless and He is infinite in His knowledge. ولا يحيطون بعلمه ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء. So in the translation here, it says, they cannot attain any knowledge except that which He wills for them to attain. They cannot attain any knowledge except that which He wills for them to attain, which also implies that there is knowledge that He does not will for you to attain, right? Which also means that there is a limit to human discovery. There's a limit to human knowledge. There are things, metaphysical things, that lie beyond our perception that are not going to be given to you, that you simply do not have access to. He allows you to know only what He decides. There is knowledge that is not accessible by us, is not accessible to us. It's not accessible to our senses or to our experience. It's not accessible to experimentation. In fact, I want to share with you something that Sayyid Qutb says in في ظلال القرآن, in his commentary on this particular ayah. He says, إن الله وهب للإنسان المعرفة مذ أراد إسناد الخلافة إليه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave human beings knowledge from the moment that He desired for them to be His khulafa, His trustees on earth, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to know, but He wants us to know that which is necessary to achieve that mission, which is to become the Khalifa of Allah on earth. And so He says, وَزَوَى عَنْهُ أَسْرَارًا أُخْرَى لَا حَاجَةَ لَهُ بِهَا فِي الْخِلَافَةِ. He hid from human beings certain secrets that we do not need in order to achieve our mission as the Khalifa of Allah on earth. So the only knowledge that is accessible to us is knowledge that enables us to do our job. There are other types of knowledge that are not needed for that purpose, in which case Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hid that knowledge from us because it's not necessary. زَوَى عَنْهُ سِرَّ الْحَيَاةِ. Like I said earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hid from us the secret of life. We don't know what that is. Okay? We say the word, but we don't necessarily know what it means. وَزَوَى عَنْهُ سِرَّ اللَّحْظَةِ الْقَادِمَةِ. He hid from the human being the secrets of the upcoming moment. I have no idea what's going to happen in the next moment. Right? where you're kind of just living it 1 second at a time. So these are secrets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept from us. And again, that is an understanding of God that leads to surrender, that leads to contentment, that leads to fulfillment with the choices of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Of course, you may translate kursi as dominion, as power, as reach, but it says kursi, and kursi, like I said, is the footrest of God. This is where God, if God had legs, if God has feet, he would have rested, his feet on this kursi, right? And so it's one of two things. It's either kursi is a metaphor for the power and the impact and the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or it means something that is very different from what you and I understand to be the footrest today. Either way, the essence of this ayah of this part of the ayah is really important, because what it's trying to say here is that something that is of God, but it's not an attribute of God. This is an object, but it's an object of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? This object is bigger than the entire universe. We're not even talking about the throne. We're talking about something much simpler than the throne. And that is bigger than the entire universe. Now imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And it's bigger not in any physical sense. See, the mind gravitates towards physicality. It's not bigger in any physical sense. Bigger because it's literally physically bigger than the universe. It's bigger because anything in the universe can still be comprehensible to the mind, no matter how big the universe is. Why? Because the universe has very repeatable physical laws, very predictable physical laws. So it doesn't matter if it's like 100 million light years away, it still follows the same physical laws. I can still comprehend it. So no matter how big the universe is, I can still process it. But anything beyond the universe, when the very concepts and notions that you and I understand, when math doesn't work anymore, when science doesn't work anymore, when physics means absolutely nothing, when the very basic core concepts that constitute the human mind, don't exist, that is much bigger than us, and therefore we cannot really process it. And if he's outside of this universe, then he's perfectly capable of sustaining that universe. And he says here, وَلَا يَؤُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. It does not exhaust him, it does not tire him to sustain the universe, right? Because he is independent of that universe, subhanahu wa ta'ala. The laws of the universe are very consistent. Some of the things I think that puzzled the physicists, for so long is the so-called cosmological constants. Anyone knows what those are? What are the cosmological constants? There's 19 of those in physics. The acceleration of gravity, what's the value of the acceleration of gravity?
Like thermodynamics stuff?
No, there is actual values. If you take any object and you throw that object, let's say from the second floor, it will fall down with an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared. Why? Why not 10? Why not 8.5? Why not 15? Why that particular value? What is the speed of light? About 300 kilometers per second. It's slightly less. It's just 299,000 something, right? Slightly less than 300, 1,000 kilometers per second. 187,000 miles per second, something like that. Why that particular value? We don't know why. We just discovered it, right? The gravitational force, it has an actual value. Why? The weight of the electron has an actual value. Why this and nothing else? These are called the cosmological constants. So we've discovered them. We have no idea where they came from, right? They're very, very strange. But again, this is Allah's way of managing the universe, by endowing the universe with these, unalterable physical laws that continue to manage it, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides that it is over. وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. And that's when the ayah ends, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Aliyu Al-Azim. Who is Al-Aliyu Al-Azim? He is the one that is truly exalted and the most tremendous. The one that is truly exalted and most tremendous. Again, we can praise Allah all we want, but nothing would match the way He praised Himself in the Quran and the way He characterized Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ali, He is exalted in actual station, but He's also exalted in His power and in His dominion, right? You accept the maqam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be above you. In fact, the Quran says, تِلْكَ الدَّارُ الْآخِرَةِ نَجْعَلُهَا لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُرِيدُونَ عُلُوًّا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فَسَادًا. Ulu, the idea of being exalted, right, is a quality that God reserved for Himself. No human being should ever seek to be exalted. Why is arrogance, the worst sin? Because the arrogance, inadvertently, is your attempt to be at the level of God's. Right? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has that right. Can Allah be arrogant? If He decided to, it would be His prerogative. Right? It would be perfectly justified. He calls Himself Al-Kabir, right? The most great, right? But the human being cannot seek to be exalted, because now, what is it exactly? Are you seeking, to be a match to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is the one that God hates the most, right? So you surrender to the will of Allah, you don't complain, you follow His orders, and you are content with His decree upon you. And so these are the types of ideas, the thought process that is produced in the mind when you read Ayatul Kursi. And like I said, Ayatul Kursi establishes with clarity the essence of God, which is something that is unfathomable. So, don't waste your time trying to understand what it is and ask silly questions and what is the nature of God and the hand of God and the eyes of God and all that. That's just, you're wasting your time, because your mind will never be able to process that. And like I said, we're okay with that intellectually. And so this ayah explains to you the unfathomable essence of God. It explains you the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It explains you to the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and sets the intellectual foundation straight in your mind, so that you're able to produce the right type of ideas that would be conducive to the construction of a God-conscious civilization. So I will stop here, inshallah, and I'll take some of your questions, and we need to pray Maghrib in just a couple of minutes. Any questions? Please.
So you mentioned about the time. That is very interesting. That it has. What I'm trying to ask is that I'm sure you must have heard of the B theory.
Correct.
It means
yes.
that the B theory, other than it saying that time is eternal, is accurate, because it says that time has no past, present, and future. It is all existing at the same time. It's just a subjective illusion. So do you agree with that statement then?
I do and I don't, and I mostly don't. And I'll tell you why. The distinction between the A theory and the B theory is not a conversation of physicists. This is a philosophical discussion. This is a matter of semantics. It doesn't matter at the end of the day because in the B theory they say that there is actual reality in 1965 that is happening, while at the same time there's an actual reality that unfolds in 2024 in Roseville, California, where the Imam is conducting the Tafseerah program, right? And then there is an actual reality in 2075 when Palestine is free, right? This is not a matter of temporal order. The B theory says those things are happening simultaneously, all right? Now, the primary reason why the proponents of the B theory have pushed this philosophical narrative, which, like I said, at the end of the day is not entirely useful. I am yet to see its usefulness. I think that the reason they do this is because they want to fight against causality. They want to show that things can exist without cause. Because if I follow the A theory, okay, then one thing leads to the other. And if one thing leads to the other, then there's causality. And if there's this causality, then there has to be an initial event. And if there's an initial event, then God has to exist, right? So in order to overcome that, they've created this twisted perspective, the B theory, right, which is essentially designed to do away with causality and to create an existence where everything is just happening at the same time, past, present, future, it's all that. And so the only value that I see in this is that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may see existence through the B theory perspective, not us, right? Not us. And so for us, perhaps it might be argued that we live in an A existence, but God sees the B existence. Very nice. Right? This would be my take on this. And so the B theory is not helpful for us. I think it's just a gimmick in order to get them out of responsibility. But at the end of the day, even if the B perspective is valid, for me as a human being, okay, there's still events that already happened in the past that I cannot change. For me, I look at when I was in high school, I look at myself when I was a child. Okay, you can talk all you want, but Imam Aziz, or I wasn't Imam Aziz back then, I was just Muhammad, right? When I was in high school, that person is gone and it's not going to come back, right? And there is another person, it could still be Imam Aziz or it could be something else, right? That still resides in my future, okay? So I don't care what you want to say about the entire universe, but when I look at myself, my reality is an A reality, 100%. And it's one event that led to the other, and it still, doesn't make any difference to me, right? So that's why, I get irked a little bit by this whole thing. Any other questions? Yes.
I guess my question is, you were talking about in the beginning about creating a God-conscious society, and, I kind of wonder what are the first steps towards that, because I think about people, like Marcus Garvey, for example. He saw no fate in America and the West, so they tried to go back to Africa, and so many other political activists as well too. But then you do see some people as well within the, let's say, political activist tradition, where they do decide to stay here and try to make a difference, right, within like lobbying and creating laws, like social activism and stuff like that. So I guess my question is, where do you see the most possible route where success can happen? Should we leave America, right? Or should we...
We Muslims don't walk away from a fight, period. We never walk away from a fight. We're here for a reason. I love what you've done with your hair, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
But you were born here for a reason. There are those who are born here for a reason. There are those who immigrated here for a reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is part of His plan. All right? This is a fight. You walk away from America, America just turns into this dragon that spews its fire all over the world. It's already going crazy. And if the one last hope for this country is gone, then you have this behemoth. Then you have like these, 1 million hydrogen bombs, clustered up together, waiting to detonate and destroy itself and destroy the world. I don't think that we should ever allow that. And I think that any call for Muslims to abandon American society and to walk away are not only futile, I think they're also very dangerous, right? We as Muslims, we build, we construct, we fix, we clean, right? We bring sanity to wherever we go, right? And you live like this and you die like this and you keep fighting the good fight until you exhale the last breath, right? That's what we are and that's what we do. And so you want to call this activism, you want to call this running for office, you want to call this, pressuring the government, doing lobbying and fundraising and advocacy. You want to call this whatever you want to call it, right? Laws can change and they do change and they will change and they must change every single day. Politicians, they come and go. Laws, they come and go. At the end of the day, it's a human community. And that human community is bound by relationships derived from certain laws that are very finite in their nature. Okay? 200 years ago, America was not playing this role in the world. America was playing a relatively better role, right? 100 years from today, America will be playing a very different role. You happen to be in America at a time when America is really misbehaving so badly, right? And the solution is not to walk away. The solution is to put our heads together and to, continue to fight the good fight. You live, well, I know that you have other plans, but, the rest of us live in the capital of perhaps one of the most important states in this union. And inshallah ta'ala, for as long as we're still here. By the way, I just posted on social media right before Tafseerah, a very, very good friend of mine, a friend of 25 years, Ahmed, he lives in Michigan. He's running for Congress, and he's attempting to unseat an incumbent that is a known Zionist, like a horrific human being in every aspect, right? In fact, she herself unseated Andrew Levine, who is Jewish himself, but he was actually a very reasonable non-Zionist Jew. He was removed, and they brought this staunch Zionist into that district. Now Ahmed is trying to unseat her. And the minute he put his name on the ballot, oh my God, the outpour of support was insane, to the extent that the incumbent is seriously and legitimately scared of losing her seat. 5 years ago? Okay. 5 months ago? This would have been unimaginable, right? To have an immigrant who speaks with an accent, he's a doctor, he's a really successful guy, but to have an immigrant who speaks with an accent, who lived 23 years of his life, elsewhere, to potentially unseat, a Jewish politician or a Zionist politician, it was unimaginable. But it's happening, right? And he reached out to me, and he consulted with me, throughout the process, and I advised him to run, and alhamdulillah he did. And we want to host, inshallah, an event for him in Sacramento. I'm contacting people in Texas. I'm contacting people in Southern California, in Chicago. I'm trying to get him, fundraising events and stuff like that. Things are happening. Society is changing. Pro-Palestine voices are rising. Anti-Israel voicing are becoming legitimate and mainstream, right? And not anti-Semitic, right? Half the Jewish community is now becoming pro-Palestine. These are unprecedented times, in which we live. And so, inshallah ta'ala, I say we have to continue the good fight. And the notion of migrating elsewhere, I don't think that would be proper, for our objectives as the Khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any other questions? Yes.
You were talking about alternative, that not sort of following this idea that Western civilization is the ultimate successful, the standard for success. And there's some pockets of communities like the Amish or other communities that sort of digress from it. And I wonder if if there was an organized real estate effort kind of almost to create more insular Muslim communities. I think there's pockets in Michigan, Detroit already, but I wonder if that would be something that
there is an essential difference though. There's an essential difference between us and the Amish. I was actually speaking in the Bay Area a few years ago, and I was talking about political engagement and so forth. Same thing like I said right now. And then this brother stood up in the audience, and he was, quite angry, and he said, you should not encourage people to get more involved in this corrupt political system, right? If you leave them alone, they're going to leave you alone. Look at the Amish and look at some of these groups. They go and they find a village and they live, isolated from civilization. I looked at him and I said, we can't afford to do that as Muslims. Our job is to not isolate ourselves from the world and to seclude ourselves and sequester ourselves. Our job is to fix and change the world. The Khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are supposed to be out there at the forefront, changing people, fixing people. You can't say all the doctors of the world, they need to live together in a sequestered village somewhere. Who's going to treat all the patients? Who's going to perform all the surgeries? It's just us. That's our responsibility. Our responsibility is to muscle our way through and mingle with the world and not isolate ourselves from a world that needs us the most. This is like telling, the prophets and the messengers, isolate yourselves from the very people you're supposed to help. This is like telling the Prophet ﷺ, don't come back to Mecca. Continue to live with your Medina enclave and forget about the rest of the world. That's not something that we can do, right? But we certainly can make personal choices. We can make individual choices in our own homes, in our own lives. The type of things that we buy, the type of clothes, the type of cars, the type of priorities, right? The type of vacations that we have, how we spend our money, how we invest our wealth. We need to create alternative realities for ourselves and not just do the bidding of Western ideals without thinking, right? This is what people around us do, therefore we just do the same thing. We just have to make sure it's halal. That's the only consideration. I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do the halal version of it. I say take it a step further and do something else entirely. It doesn't have to be the same exact thing, right? Instead of, okay, everyone takes a vacation, they go to the Caribbean, or they go to Hawaii, or they go to Baja or something, whatever, some fancy resort, or they take the cruise. I hate cruises so much. I've never been on one, but I think it's the absolute most ludicrous notion ever, is to put tens of thousands of people on a floating city. They do absolutely nothing but eat 24/7. Okay, and they see the sea from all four directions, and after 6 hours, you're just bored out of your mind. Okay, that makes any sense. So the Muslim alternative is like a halal cruise that serves halal meat. See, it's the same thing. I am literally borrowing the same notion from Western civilization, and I'm just halalifying it, but by making it dhabiha, right? No, that's so lazy. You come up with something entirely different, right? You take your kids and you go to Uzbekistan and visit Bukhara and Samarkand and the resting place of Imam Bukhari, and show them the library of the Imam Maturidi, and let all the pride in their heritage and their history come to the surface, and eat exotic food, and live in a tent with simple people, locals, right, with zero comforts. That would be a vacation right there. The memory of which will last a lifetime. Right? So even when we do our vacations, I think we need to do those things differently. But at the same time, the solution is not isolation. The solution is not for us to remove ourselves, but rather come back to that same society with an alternative set of ideals, and find a way to convince them that this is what you need to adopt. Like an entire zip code.
Yeah, take a stronghold of
What if that becomes a Muslim ghetto? And then you start having all kinds of bad behavior accumulating and growing out of control. Everyone in that community is going to be late, right? Everyone in that community is going to be cheating on their taxes. We do have very bad qualities as well. And so I think the point is, for the good to be enhanced and for the bad to be cast aside. I don't know. I don't want to make commentary on the zip code idea, but I think it's actually healthy for us. Even if I know that in Texas, for example, they're doing this. Whatever you call it, the Epic Masjid, Epic 2.0, whatever. The Valley Ranch Masjid did this before. In Ohio, in Dublin, Ohio, they did this. In Toronto, they did this. And I know that it's one of the things that we are, in the future, inshallah, we want to do right here. But this is not a Muslim enclave, right? This is not going to be, it's not going to be inaccessible to non-Muslims, right? So that's the key. That's the key. Muslims want to come together and live close to their masjid. Yes, that's fine, as long as we are still okay with non-Muslims coming and living in our midst, right? Yes?
What you guys are just talking about was reminding me that for the Prophet ﷺ, he did not make hijrah up until it was absolutely necessary. He was tolerating all sorts of persecution. To no extent we are facing anywhere similar to that here, but it was till the very end that hijrah became the option and was...
It was like a life and death.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But up until that time, he was in Makkah in intolerable conditions, doing the dawah, doing whatever he could. Well, I'm just thinking that you're talking about the creation of this God-conscious community and industries that come with it, all of that. And there is a sense sometimes that to do that, to have that spirit, for so many that that you have other imperatives or other reasoning, and that becomes whether it's wealth, power, whatever, that becomes to the forefront. Like one of the conversations I have with some of my friends is like, we need a Muslim Elon Musk. We need a Muslim Jeff Bezos. Why don't we have somebody?
A crazy, impulsive.
Right. You know, some autistic.
Autistic.
But to that, it's like, no, some of these character traits and some of their motivations come into conflict with our Islamic ethics, right? And so how do you reconcile?
No, I agree, and so good ideas cannot exist in vacuum either, right? They need to be supported by wealth. And that is actually the other foundation here in this section. You know, I said that the foundations of a godly or a God-conscious civilization, the foundations of Imaratul Ard are two things: al-fikr wal-mal, sound intellect and wealth. And the word wealth obviously means so much more than financial wealth. You know, power and political influence and all of that. So inshallah, we're going to talk about this. You know, I think your mind is looking at the right thing here. You know, you're anticipating, you know, the right notion. So inshallah, this is going to come up in the next 2 sessions or so. I think we're going to have to stop here, guys, in order to pray Maghrib. Jazakallah khair, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, shalla la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asri, al-insanu fi khusr, alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil